Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to 2020 Vision, a unique piece of online theatre by Emma Wood. This production is a joint collaboration between Ballarat National Theatre and Warrandyte Theatre Company, and is a verbatim presentation of many experiences of this pandemic. We would like to take this opportunity to again acknowledge all the contributors to this script. We are assuming the NBN functions satisfactorily, but well, who knows? But if it does drop out, please know that the show is being recorded and will be available at a later date online. Now, as per instructions in the document sent to you earlier, there are 3 things that you need to do. Please make sure that your cameras and microphones are turned off, that you have selected gallery view, and that you have also selected to hide non-video participants from the video settings. It might also be a good idea to check that there is no one else in the household who is using the internet for the next hour. At the end of the show, we encourage you to join in. Turn your mics and cameras on. It's chaotic, but fun. There will be no interval, so make sure that you've got your refreshments and drinks nearby. Now sit back and enjoy the show.
"2020 was going to be a good year."
Last year was the first New Year's I had stayed up to celebrate in a decade, and I might not do it again. After a few wonderful days on the lake, we got word of the fires. We couldn't get back to the marina, so we took refuge at Mitchell River in Bairnsdale and spent New Year's on the deck of a boat, fires raging all around us. It wasn't the relaxing start of the year we had hoped for, but more of a warning sign of things to come.
2020 began for me in the Victorian high country with my daughter and her family. Bushfires in the area spurred us to head home rather than risk being stranded. But compared to the nightmares others were experiencing, we felt fortunate.
My wife and I plan to explore far and wide on this continent and others. We intended that this year would be full to the brim.
I was looking forward to a new chapter in an exciting city. My hopes for 2020 were high.
I was anticipating a fulfilling year, personally, creatively, and professionally.
My year was full and everything was rosy.
I had no complaints. I was happy with my lot.
I had moved to Australia in 2018 with my husband. We lived in Perth for 2 years and then moved to Melbourne in February 2020. Our furniture arrived just as everything was closing up.
Honestly, on a highly personal level, 2019 was a worse year for me than 2020. I was anticipating settling and resolving issues in 2020. It was looking good, and then it changed.
This year would be different. I was optimistic for a year full of activity. How I would juggle everything was going to be my biggest worry.
I was feeling better than I had in several years. My treatment for blood cancer was doing what was required, and my energy was returning. Life was good, and the year was full of promise.
It was going to be a good year.
Welcome and thank you for joining us. We're excited to bring you a unique performance of a brand new script tonight. And I'm proud to introduce these wonderful actors from Melbourne and Ballarat in this collaborative project between Ballarat National Theatre and Warrandyte Theatre Company.
Over the next hour, we'll share the words of more than 50 Victorians who have shared their thoughts during the year 2020. I'd say unprecedented, but hey, I didn't say it.
Oh, yeah, you said it. God, moving on. Now, each of us will share the words and experiences of many different people. So don't look too hard for an individual narrative. You won't find one. A 2020 vision is the voices of many, spoken by a few.
The words you'll hear were offered in response to questions posed one day at a time on an open Facebook page in September 2020 during the seemingly endless second lockdown. While time seemed to be stopped, our voices were not.
People were eager to share their experiences in a raw and vulnerable way and create a community that spanned across Melbourne, Ballarat and surrounding areas.
This is a story by all of us, for all of us. It's a snapshot of where we are in this historic year.
So now you've heard where some of us began the new year and how this project began. Let's hear some more from the people of Victoria. When did it first become real for you? What was the trigger and how did you feel?
I was for some time happily oblivious to the seriousness of COVID. The news was bleak, but Australia seemed untouched. It was all far away.
I'll admit that at the beginning, I was one of those people that thought it was all an overreaction to a mild flu-like virus. And that was before it started tearing across Europe.
Oh, in March, I was traveling in the UK where it just wasn't real. I was going to crowded pubs, shops, even West End shows. And I was incredulous from the news back home of all the toilet paper hoarding. I thought Australia had gone mad.
I think it first struck me that this was much worse than SARS when I watched Four Corners on the 24th of February. It was the first time I'd heard of Wuhan. I remember the footage of bodies in the streets and the welding shut of apartments.
It was immediately real. I watched the very first post from China and started researching and reading scientific papers. I posted on social media alerting friends and family and got called out for being alarmist.
March 13th, I was sitting on my bed when they made the official announcement that we were in a pandemic. I distinctly remember saying, shit, this was bad.
I was in a hotel in Bali. I received smart travel emails every day that listed countries that were closing their borders. Not just one or two countries, but 20, 30 at a time.
Our son lives and works in China, so it became real a lot sooner for us. It was just like watching a car crash in slow motion and knowing there was nothing you could do to avoid it.
There was this moment in March when I realised that COVID wasn't a side topic people discussed. It had become the topic, and every other conversation was framed by it. It was everything.
Yeah, I live on a busy, noisy road. Everything went quiet.
While working with customers, a man was coughing without covering his mouth, and I politely asked him to turn away or cover his mouth, and he ranted on saying he wasn't contagious. And I went home that evening and had a meltdown.
I don't think there was a single thing that made it click. it was just this slow realization that it was going to be serious. The pandemic was coming to Australia and people were going to die.
I remember thinking that this is ridiculous. I mean, what an overreaction. And I was angry. I needed an income. So I became an Uber driver. And I think it was when I did a 9-hour shift for only 3 fares that I realized the seriousness of it all and that my wings had well and truly been clipped. My mental health started to decline and I was scared.
My daughter said to me, "I'm scared that you'll die alone and that I won't be allowed to see you."
Well, I work for one of the major supermarkets, so it started to feel real quite early. My husband is asthmatic. I got scared then because this virus could be deadly for him and I could bring it home with me.
Looking at the empty shelves in Coles, it was so surreal.
Yeah, the AFL season will begin with no spectators at the traditional Richmond Carlton opening game.
It seemed like every shopper had a trolley full of toilet paper.
I realized that the movement of my family, including myself, could determine whether or not my 90-year-old mum would live or die.
My usually immaculate 96-year-old grandmother in a nursing home became so down, talking about wanting to die.
Walking around the empty CBD, Collins Street, Burke Street Mall, and the normally teeming laneways, all dead as doornails.
When my sister and her family had to go into isolation because they'd been exposed to the virus, it really hit home. I was genuinely scared for my family.
Well, I don't know anyone that's contracted COVID, so it doesn't feel quite real for me. Our family have lost 2 children due to pneumonia, and that is real.
Well, I got a message from a good friend. She was sick with the virus. Her daughter brought it home from work. My friend's daughter was in ICU for a week. Her husband was in hospital for months. He nearly didn't come home. They all have ongoing health issues.
One of my dearest friends, who had been battling cancer, took a turn for the worse, and I couldn't go and see her in hospital. And my heart just broke.
Let's talk about Lockdown 1.0, lessons, losses, and silver linings.
Lockdown 1 was a bit of a blur for me. Unfortunately, I managed to get the virus on my way home from London after spending the entire long-haul flight next to a coughing father and daughter without masks. I guess I gained rather a novel experience, at least for an Australian.
I returned from overseas in March and had to isolate at home. I lived by myself and I thought, without distractions, I could buckle down and commit diligently to something I'd wanted to do for 30 years. Right. Well, I didn't. Not a word. I won't be going to my grave with the thought, if only I'd had time to write, because I certainly had the time.
Well, I just spent a week in the bush rebuilding burnt out fences from the summer fires. Doing that physical work, I could help. I felt part of a team, useful, needed, and I was ready to do more. But with this first lockdown, all I could do now to help was stay home, as I had no skills for the fight.
The first lockdown came 8 months into my widowhood. We'd been together 34 years. We were very close, doing everything together and talking constantly right to the end. After losing him, my life was saved by the attentiveness of my many dear friends. I have no other family. I came to rely on friends to ease my sudden loneliness. So I found myself coming to terms with losing my companion at home and also losing the comfort of friends.
I went into a shut-down mode of depression. Basically stayed in bed all day, only getting up to go to the loo to eat. Just seemed no purpose. It felt like I'd fallen into a hole too deep to climb out of. Heading into winter made it even worse.
I'm a teacher. I had a panic attack one day. I'd never had one before. It was over something silly and simple and unrelated. Something like the washing up. But I cried for 2 hours. I felt like no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, it wasn't enough. Like I wasn't managing anything well. I was doing hundreds of things poorly. I was just so very weary and heart heavy.
I gained a calm I probably really needed. Pajamas at 5, if I felt like it, was perfectly okay. The feeling of bunkering down was nice. Slower is okay.
I reconnected with myself. I had lost me prior to the pandemic. And the first lockdown saw me starting to emerge again. I learned that I liked my own company. To a point.
Well, I saved a fair amount of money, which made me realise that half the things I buy, I don't actually need.
My mum was a child on the outskirts of London during World War II. Their lives were turned upside down. Strangers moved into their house with them. They were on rations. They learned to recognise the sound of German planes. I never imagined that these childhood stories would equip me for a pandemic. But we'll get through this, and life will go on. It's temporary.
Your year in one word, go.
Disappointing.
Dystopian. Discombobulating. Disquietening.
Relentless, unsettling, surreal.
Fucked.
But also restorative, transformative, motivational, a blessing.
Again.
Really? Is that making a comeback?
Hell yeah.
Suspended. Monotonous. Timeless.
Quiet.
Still.
Haunting.
Low.
Plutonian.
What? Say what?
Of or associated with the underworld. I know, I had to look it up too.
How do you think this crisis has and will impact your generation?
Looking back my generation, do.
Okay, Boomer.
Oh, come on, you know that one.
Yeah, I sure do. But let's hear first from those who don't.
I fear that our society is going to become more defiant and fight more often. Before this virus, there was already a division between ages, political stances, views on climate change, and tensions are just growing and growing with restrictions to our freedoms.
My generation already felt that climate change was critical. Everything that has happened this year has re-emphasized that.
After this is all over, the pendulum will swing with a lot of momentum caused from the pressure over the lockdown period. People might go too far in celebrating their freedom. Others might get disconnected and find it harder to get close to people.
Massive unemployment, and people working in jobs they're overqualified for. I'm already seeing it in my group.
Yeah, as a graduate student, a lot of my friends are from overseas backgrounds. I think they've been the most affected out of my peers because they've not had their networks of family and close loved ones to draw upon. Nor have they felt like the government's been particularly on their side.
This will impact a lot of women who have had to make sacrifices to school their children at home. They're going to find it even harder to enter back into the workforce or claw back equality. And I can't help but wonder how much the mental health of new parents will suffer. It really takes a village. And we're all disconnected from our village right now.
Yeah, you're right. Once all the restrictions and supplements are lifted, then the outlook for some will be quite grim. It will be a forced poverty.
I was hoping to work my ass off over the next few years and maybe buy a small apartment, but I might just be lucky to get part-time work now.
I've heard many people in my age group talk about the value of now, question what we're working so hard for, and noticing how little we need, and whether retiring early isn't such a bad idea.
I'm okay, but I know that others have found it really tough. Sometimes I find myself almost apologizing for not being more upset.
Well, hopefully it makes us more mindful and considerate and not just take our lifestyle for granted. Because as we have seen, it can be taken away in the blink of an eye.
And what about an older person's perspective?
We were brought up in an era of self-reliance. We walked, cycled, used public transport. In 4 years of university, I went out for coffee once. We all have too much stuff. Travelling overseas is a privilege. We could cut back.
It will be polarising. Some will say, bugger it, and live the rest of their lives as though tomorrow is their last day, with the consequences that the baby boomers will continue to bugger up the planet for their children and grandchildren. Others will be more reticent about going out and about.
Perhaps we'll have to content ourselves with exploring our own vast backyards. And all those lovely quiet spots back home will be overrun with hordes of us trying to escape each other.
Well, we have to adapt. We are a society, not a bunch of individuals. Maggie Thatcher, you were wrong.
We've seen a heightened fear of the virus, with deaths in the older population being predominantly presented as a danger to us all. Now there's this increasing isolation issue amongst our similarly aged friends who live by themselves.
The need to find peace of mind through all of these losses is paramount. Also, the struggle not to feel useless and abandoned in our society because of ageism.
Basically, we'll kill a whole lot of them.
I hope that there will be growth from this struggle, a human rebirth, like a forest after a fire. I'd rather focus on the phoenix than the ashes.
The announcement of the second lockdown was a wake-up call. We were in this for the long haul. What was different for you this time?
Same, but different. The novelty had well and truly worn off.
The tougher restrictions immediately made the leash feel tighter around my neck. And it made me realize how one wrong step can influence an entire community exponentially.
Version 2 required a lot of soul searching and deeper thinking. Some of the grave scenarios will now begin to look more likely.
It's harder to see an end to this one. Money's wearing out.
I accepted that the choice of a second lockdown was ultimately for the best. But being a person who appreciates the freedoms we have in Australia, I found some restrictions rather disturbing.
I was emotionally and physically exhausted from keeping positive for my team at work, and it seemed like a very long road ahead. And I didn't like Melbourne going from the most livable city to the pariahs of Australia.
We are all Melburnians now, Scotty from marketing said. We are all in this together. I never felt that. And he stopped saying it pretty fast, so I guess he didn't either.
The stark effect on businesses really struck me. I envisaged a world on the other side of COVID that was straight out of a sci-fi movie. Dark, desperate and frightening.
I was walking my dog around the street and I hadn't yet put on a mask. A local coming in the opposite direction seemed to reel back in horror as we came close to passing one another. Haven't forgot my mask since.
The light at the end of the tunnel never got any bigger, and the monotony was like the virus itself, slow, steady, silent, and disorienting.
I'm asthmatic. I haven't left the house since March. That was 6 months of being stuck in my house without even so much as a visit to the supermarket to break things up.
I've watched more news reports in this time than I had in the last 10 years. Seeing those numbers climb from 20s to 50s and then hundreds, and then the death toll started. And the aged care homes were being decimated. It was devastating to know that all those people were dying alone, while other people were whinging that wearing face masks violated their human rights.
This time feels endless. It's hard to stay positive and uplifted. There seems also to be a lot of anger and blaming this time, less togetherness.
Yes, I'm flabbergasted at the conspiracy theories and divided anger and nasty comments on social media. And I've such deep grief at losing relationships with several vital people in my life as a result.
I feel there's something missing, a hole in my gut or my heart. Maybe just the loss of normality. Maybe the media or the blame game politically. The second lockdown made me sad for humanity at a very, very deep level.
Concern for elderly parents or sick loved ones in hospital or care facilities. Sometimes lonely lives in normal situations seem to plunge into even lonelier times in lockdown. And, for the ones on the outside, seeing the life of their loved ones slip away, the confusion that was enveloping them from a safe distance with just a pane of glass, eliminating those comforting whispers and reassuring hands.
I'm deaf in one ear. Now I feel like I need to explain my disability to everybody that I talk to because I read lips and faces. People are allowed to remove masks to speak to hearing impaired people, but because I'm young and I speak normally, I've been accused of lying and met with impatience, I still haven't really left my house because of this communication barrier.
I'm trying to give myself a break. I'm trying to do what I can and to accept when I just can't.
Well, I made 2 semi-beneficial discoveries. 1, never burp when you wear a mask, it's never pretty. And 2, I think I'm in a love triangle with Netflix and Stan.
Lockdown 2.0 broke whatever part of me was certain that this was all going to resolve or blow over or be okay. There came a time 2 months in where I was done. Had properly enough. Playing around in the silver linings was denying the grief of not living a life like anything I wanted. Yeah, I've launched projects and I've done some amazing things, but seriously, fuck every single silver lining. I could have done them anyway if I'd wanted. I don't want them. I want safety. I want certainty. I want the 1,000 memories and moments I've been robbed of. I want to see my grandparents. I want to make my mum breakfast in the mornings like I used to. I want one thing in this goddamn world to be certain so that there's something to look forward to and something, no matter how tiny, to hope for.
What state of mind are you in a word?
Oh, anxiety, appreciation, adjustment, boredom, depression, reflection, safety, stillness, surrender.
Was that in alphabetical order?
Yeah, well, I said I was bored.
And the kids, how are they feeling?
Oh, weird and sad, frustrated, lonely, and bored.
That's not all they had to say. The word I heard was flaming pile of elephant shit.
One word?
No spaces, like a hashtag.
Oh, I'm still trying to figure those out. But I heard another good one someone invented. Groundhogging.
Hugless, unsatisfiable, biblical.
I asked my children. My 3-year-old answered, truck. I think it's rhyming slang.
And the things that kept us going.
Wine, cheese, coffee, chocolate.
$9.99 Prosecco from Aldi.
Cups of tea in pretty mugs and gin in pretty glasses.
My fiance and my cats have kept me grounded while we were grounded.
My husband.
My wife.
The unrestrained laughter of my children.
My sister. Friends online.
Voices of friends. I'm old school. I like to ring people and hear their voices.
Reaching out to people who needed more comfort than I did.
My garden, my dog, and my guitar.
Scrolling through photos of together times to remind me that those times will be back someday.
Look, I closed up. I know I should phone friends, but somehow I just don't get round to do it.
I still have to go to work, but to an empty school. I made a video and I sent it to some colleagues because, well, I was bored. Before I knew, little did I know that they really needed the contact. So requests came for more. And before I knew it, I'd put out 10 Simon from Sickbay videos.
Watching all the beautiful birds in our garden.
Yeah, walking outside with my partner has kept me sane. I call them our soul walks. Without that joy, I think I might have gone nuts.
Walking at dusk, catching glimpses of lovely, cozy, sometimes luxurious, sometimes messy, and pretty much always occupied homes.
I quickly settled into a personal morning ritual. It became my armour for the day.
My morning latte purchase at the local coffee shop. It supports struggling local cafes. It feeds my coffee addiction, helps me feel connection to the community. It's such a small thing, but when my world is full of worry, I know I always have my morning latte to look forward to.
Video games. They're a great distraction and they kept me busy.
Bloom where you are planted. I believe there is always something positive one can do. I loved the fact that I could use my time as I wanted. I took the opportunity to learn a language.
I took up knitting and I made beanies and jumpers for my 2 new grandsons that I haven't been able to see, smell, cuddle, but it makes me feel closer to them.
Harvesting my 5 beautiful pumpkins one by one. Prayer and church online.
But once in a while, when it all got too much, collapsing on couch with Netflix. Or just having a good cry.
When you look to the future, do you think what we've been through will change your approach to life?
There is a saying, you don't know what you have till it's gone.
I worry about whether we'll ever rid of this wretched virus and the chance of similar occurrences.
It's incredibly difficult to see the future right now. It feels like some strange, hazy place that I'm less and less certain we'll ever reach.
I'll be living with more fear in my life. Fear of the disease, fear of global events impacting me and the people around me.
I feel more afraid of going out and seeing people than I ever have before. As someone who's already socially anxious, this is devastating. To crave something that you fear, it's not much fun. Yeah.
Richard Flanagan mentioned on 7:30 recently that the economic growth and peace we've experienced since the 1950s is abnormal. I've been thinking along the same lines myself. I tend to not look too far over the horizon, lest it appear too bleak.
It's becoming too little of a stretch of the imagination of the planet actually being destroyed or the worst of humanity actually being real.
What can we learn from this? One thing I've learned is that I don't need busyness. Slowing down has allowed me to appreciate more deeply the simple everyday things, and I don't want to lose that.
Living more simply is essential. Relationships are the priority.
Take nothing for granted. Live one day at a time.
Well, won't change my way of life, but my attitudes to hygiene and personal space will be forever altered.
Old dog and new tricks. I'm too set in my ways.
We can never be the same.
No, I think it's pretty hard to shift most people at a deep level long term. Maybe it'll just play out like a New Year's resolution.
I will hold on a little more tightly to the joy and wonder of human interaction, especially with those closest to me.
The freedom of choice to do or to not do something. That's something I took for granted, and I don't think I will anymore.
I know. I just want to do more, interact more, and be more than what I am now.
I hope the Himalayan peaks stay visible in India and that the fish will always be seen in the Grand Canal, Venice.
Yes.
It didn't take long for the environment to bounce back. Maybe we will all be more aware of our footprint. We can only dream.
Connection and disconnection. How did we find it? What did you most miss?
I miss the joy, the laughter, the energy and emotion that comes from being in the presence of others, the overlapping of vibrant conversations that you can't get from being online.
It is the weirdest feeling. It's almost surreal. You see and speak to people online, but it doesn't quite seem real. It's like we are permanently in a video game, lost in the Matrix.
You're on show the whole time. I prefer phone calls.
Yeah, it's like eating food with no nutrients. It's no real substitute. It might look like connection, but it's not feeding my soul or nourishing my heart.
Humans have a rhythm. They have beating hearts and breathing chests. Now, there is no pulse, no breath. It's like falling out of time. And instead of that natural beat, we're trying to facilitate a metronome, and the sound of only that for months is driving me insane.
Well, I'm doing all right, actually. I've been involved in artistic endeavors that never would have happened without the virus and pandemic, and I've made connections with some really wonderful people who I may never have met. We've all had some losses, but there've been some gains.
Yeah, well, I wrote an original piece of music every weekday for 6 months and shared it as an educational resource for people to enjoy. But it became so much more than that. Music students were enjoying it, and there were dedicated supporters who recorded the tunes and then sent them back to me with their own unique twist. I wanted to give something meaningful to people, and it brought us closer despite that physical disconnection.
It turns out some people are polar bears and enjoy, or at least easily adapt to, social isolation. I am not one of them.
Well, I've not missed the hugs and kisses. In fact, I'm looking forward to reverting to much more bowing when we begin to meet again.
I miss not seeing people's faces, looking into each other's eyes without a mask, smiling. That connection is what I miss.
Being in a crowd, being in the hustle and bustle, sitting in a filled cinema, sipping a chai in a cafe filled to the brim. I miss parts of the world that are shut down and blocked off and far away.
Yeah, it took me a while to realize what the feeling was, the disconnection from reality, and then realizing that the way we are living is reality.
Yes. I didn't understand at first how people were bored. I mean, video games, books, crafts, and the time to do them all without getting the side eye from people. Yes, please. But it started to wear thin.
I reveled in the disconnect. And then there were days when my heart hurt for connection and contact and touch. My emotional state and mental health ebbed and flowed, and some days I did not know which way was up.
I started to doubt my value to others, which is probably silly, but isolation starts playing tricks.
I'm one of 8 children, and our treasured dad passed away during this pandemic. We took shifts at his bedside and had to say goodbye to him wearing full PPE plastic. I sang him songs playing the ukulele with gloved hands. Despite this, my connection to family has never been better. It's been some of the best of times, and it's been some of the fucking worst of times.
Many of us know that the worst of times have been occurring all over the world, and Australians have, in spite of restrictions and hardship, been much more fortunate than most countries. For a personal glimpse of this, we'd like to feature a longer response written by a woman who grew up in New York and New Jersey before raising her children and making her home in Melbourne 18 years ago.
My experience with COVID has really been a tale of two cities. I suppose I really first took notice of COVID-19 in late February. I saw a post on Facebook from my old friend, Charlie. Charlie's friend, his friend's sister, his friend's mom, and his friend's uncle had all died of COVID within a couple of days of each other. 4 people in one family. How horrific. They had all been to a baby's christening just a couple of weeks before. It didn't seem like many people had the virus then, so I thought it was really just a sad occurrence. I mean, whoever heard of anything like that? A few weeks later, my mom called me. Her best friend Elsie was in the hospital. Her family had had a get-together just after St. Patrick's Day. 11 out of the 15 adults there wound up getting COVID. 3 of them died. Elsie was one of them. Her family couldn't even go see her to say goodbye to her. A nurse read her a letter that her kids wrote her, and that was it. Her organs shut down and she died. I couldn't believe it. Australia went into lockdown, and I could see my friends on social media, cooking, baking, painting, gardening, finding ways to relax and unwind. Inspirational messages about how we could save the world just by sitting on our couch abounded. But while my local friends were getting rid of things that didn't spark joy, New York and New Jersey became the epicenter of the virus. Every day, someone else I knew was sick. Several of my cousins, my college roommates, people I used to work with. It was relentless. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to eat an entire packet of Oreos for dinner. And I definitely did not have the patience for a fucking puzzle. One of my brother's neighbors got really sick. On the day he died, a local friend messaged me a video of a mass grave in New York where unmarked coffins were being buried. I was so angry, as if I didn't know what was going on in my hometown and as if he needed to tell me. It soon became the topic of conversation with everyone I talked to here. How are things back home? It's bad over there, isn't it? Yeah. And then my brother, his wife, and my nephews all got COVID. My mom called me hysterically crying, saying my brother had a fever, couldn't breathe, and was being rushed to hospital. Hearing the fear in her voice is something I still haven't recovered from. In hospital, my brother was given a choice. Did he want oxygen, antibiotics, and IV fluids? Or did he want to try a round of experimental drug? Imagine not being able to breathe, to feel like you're choking on every cough, knowing so many people have died. Your wife and kids have just tested positive, and you have to pick your own treatment. Thankfully, my brother recovered and went home. It was weeks before he started to feel like himself again. And of course, who knows what the long-term effects are. By the time Melbourne went into a second lockdown, I was pretty frazzled. More people from the US were getting sick. Another friend lost her father-in-law and uncle, and Victoria began the daily virus count. By the time we hit 700 plus daily cases, I thought we were doomed, and I had what is called a heart event, brought on by stress. After spending an all-nighter in the hospital with doctors and nurses trying to bring my heart rate back to normal, I was told I was going to be admitted to the cardiac ward for a few days. And if my heart didn't drop, they were going to have to sedate me and shock my heart. A nurse came in to say they needed to free up the emergency bays, and I was being moved to the COVID floor to wait for something to free up in the cardiac wing. To the SCOVID floor. I asked what SCOVID meant, and she said, people who are suspected of having COVID. I told her I didn't have any symptoms. I hadn't been anywhere or seen anyone since March. I wore masks and gloves when I went to the IGA. I didn't want to get COVID while I was in the hospital. And if SCOVID floor was my only choice, I wanted to go home. I may have worked myself up a bit because I wound up shocking my own heart back into normal rhythm. 2 months into the second lockdown, and I'm not sure what day it is all the time. The US president, who paid $750 in taxes in the past 2 years, got the coronavirus and tweeted that after 2 days in hospital, he feels better than he has in 20 years, and no one should be afraid of a virus that has taken over 216,000 American lives. And yet, friends here in Australia are mad at Dan for not lifting restrictions fast enough. I have started doing paint by numbers, though. I've currently finished 4 paintings. I even listen to some podcasts while I do it. I don't know when or how this is all going to end, but at least I'll have a bunch of artwork up when it does.
Perspective has been invaluable during this year. Our thanks to the woman who shared her story with us all.
If there was a movie of your life in 2020, what would it be called?
All dressed up and nowhere to go.
You have got to be joking.
It was fun while it lasted.
Chef.
Green.
Room.
Zoom.
Bed struck.
Solitaire.
4 weddings and a funeral that we didn't get to go to.
Short-sighted, a dystopian paradise starring Peter Sellers as the virus.
Sliding doors. What the world looks like if we do everything to beat this, and what it looks like if we don't.
The nightmare before Christmas.
Like sand through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives.
Groundhog Day.
Grey.
Patient
mirror?
Zero, obviously.
Jigsaw. The pictures come to life. Waterfalls drown the people. Kittens and puppies turn rabid. The swarms of bees fly out of the Provence lavender fields. Dragons swoop through the towns.
What? No. Dodgeball. Because I can dodge a wrench and I can dodge a ball, but there is no dodging lockdown.
The Lounge. A still life.
Still I Rise, a story of grief, loss, resilience, and hope.
Has the lockdown changed the way you think about our city, our government, and our country?
I feel we are in a far better position, tough as it is, than many other countries. I would rather be here than so many other places. And the majority of people seem to have a let's just get this done attitude that makes me proud to be Australian.
I have much more respect for them now than I did before the pandemic. I've always been proud to be an Australian, but now even more so. It's still the best place in the world to live.
I am very sad to hear, though, the tone now used by some political leaders against Victorians and the lack of compassion shown in some circumstances where loved ones can't connect because of the state borders.
I'm so glad we don't have the attitude of everyone for themselves. The lockdown and distance rules protect everyone.
In Melbourne, people have been resilient and inspiring, with a cross-section of selfish and embarrassing. But since I'm pretty sure that's always been the case, not much has changed there. Look, overall, I think we have come together as a city and a state. Call it solidarity.
Yeah.
Personally, I've got to the point of being sick of the whole class being kept in at lunchtime because of a few naughty students.
Special dispensations for the super rich and elite sports persons to travel and self-isolate infuriated me.
As a country, we've been pragmatic and committed to making sacrifices where we needed to, and we've reached out. We've tried to be there for one another. There's a lot to be proud of.
Yeah, our actions have consequences. Now, whether humanity has the clarity to identify what those consequences are is something to ponder.
How will you describe this year to your children and grandchildren?
Then came 2020, when the world changed.
Now, gather round, children, and let me tell you about the first great pandemic of the 21st century. No one was prepared. This took us completely by surprise. Our leaders had a manual for dealing with this sort of thing, but no one could remember where they'd put it.
The year a microscopic particle spread to the corners of the earth. The pervading fear at the back of everyone's mind is that no one was entirely safe.
It was the first time in my 50-odd years that an event directly impacted everyone. Everyone. We're observers to the wall coming down and the invasion of Iraq and anything else that previously happened to us in our lives. This time, everyone's had their lives affected differently, directly impacted, and everyone reacted as people do, differently.
It was the year that time forgot. It was so much less overall than if life had been as it was.
It was the year that Mother Earth cracked it and sent everyone to their rooms.
You think you've got it tough. You didn't live through 2020 and the great pandemic.
Breathe the air, hug your loved ones, and never take them for granted. We battered and screamed behind closed doors for you to have that freedom.
It was the year that we learned that everything did not revolve around us and that we could accomplish great things while wearing tracky decks.
It was the year about choosing life or death, not just for ourselves, but for others. We showed up for each other and we stayed apart for each other. We showed up in fire trucks and carrying protest signs. We showed up for small local businesses. We showed up to vote. We showed up for virtual funerals and fundraising concerts. We showed up in masks.
I don't have kids, and nor do I think I ever will, but I will be certain to vent about it to my fur babies in detail and describe to them how expensive the couch they keep scratching is.
And even though there was much disagreement and anger at each other and at the government, there were many more stories about humanity, compassion, resilience, creativity, innovation and adaptation to live in a brave new world.
Once we wade through the shite, I really hope I'll be able to tell them how we banded together and helped each other through it. It has the potential of great positive change and new beginnings.
And finally, what are the moments that will resonate with you when you look back on this year?
The changing view from my little sunroom turned office, cycling through autumn, winter and spring, a constant ache in the gut. The feeling of missing something. Our dog beside us every hour of every day. The river, ever changing, always flowing.
Days and weeks with nothing scheduled, watching statistics rise and fall each day, and feeling a sense of dread when they rose, and relief when they fell, and numbness when they persisted.
And being clapped by the children at school for wearing a mask to protect them.
The slowness of life without capitalism. The sound of the birds in the mornings. The comforting sound of the coffee machine.
Walking with friends, getting to know them better, exchanging stories, feeling down and wondering how low I will get, using reserves of strength that I never knew I had.
Experiencing genuine fear while out supermarket shopping and seeing that fear reflected in the eyes of others. Expanding my culinary repertoire, but not bread. I mean, really.
Yeah. The realization that the freedom to travel and live life as we did pre-COVID may be gone forever.
The feeling that stays with me is that I don't seem to be in control of my life. Everything I do is governed by rules. I've become a recluse. Will I get social again?
Late night conversations with my husband about personal finances, business finances, and discussing redundancies of employees.
It really shook me to discover that some friends thought very differently on issues at the core of my sense of morality. It was a surprise and a disappointment.
Reading The Hobbit to my 7-year-old via FaceTime.
Extended moments and days alone. Hours of reflections and imaginings massaged by windswept gum trees, but otherwise deep quiet. Aching heart from loneliness. Sitting in the afternoons, walking at daybreak. Discovering the authentic me through all that and getting content with that. And not knowing at times if I can sustain another hour.
The hugs. I feel like I can count them on one hand.
When I shut down my PC for the last time, when I gave up work.
Standing outside my daughter's house, looking in at my grandchildren. Look, but don't touch. We did this many times, but the very first time was gut-wrenching. I tried to hide the tears that were rolling down my cheeks.
My husband and children and I singing my grandfather his favourite song through the fence at his aged care home.
You're on mute.
I'll go. Finding gifts, activities, and letters from the neighbours by our door. And every day chalking a new daily dad joke on the sign by our fence.
No, you're still on mute.
Staring incomprehensively. Staring incomprehensively at a large screen TV and watching a sibling's funeral that I could not attend.
Oh.
That I can never forget.
The driveway dawn service. I had my tea light candles and a copy of a painting by my friend of the poppy fields. Thinking I'd be the only one there, I was rapt to see neighbours out there too. We listened to the service and the last post on the ABC. I could remember my dear old dad and all of his mob who always used to march together. Such a powerful moment echoed across the country, lest we forget.
My student placement at an aged care facility, it happened to be where my father resides. To see him and to get to know the other residents and staff, to experience life and live and work inside a care bubble in the metro lockdown dome was to see people at their most raw, vulnerable, and resilient beauty. We humans are so flawed and so fabulous and so mortal.
Knowing that the world needs artists. Now, I'm so very grateful for all of the essential workers, but creativity, it frees my soul. And in times of uncertainty and disconnection, art is what helps capture the human condition and will always, always unite us.
I do what I can with what I can. Some days, hope is something that we build. Some days what I build feels as small and as fragile as a sandcastle, which I'm guarding against an inevitable and unpredictable change of the tide. But I build anyway. Otherwise, what else is there? At this point, castles are all going to be washed away. Build, tide. Build, tide. So I accept the tide, the loss, and build anyway. At least maybe if a day does come when all this is over, I can remember that I built 1,000 beautiful sandcastles in defiance of the sea.
To the people of Victoria, Australia, and the rest of the world, keep your strength wherever you are in this journey. Thank you to those who shared and those who joined us to watch. We're still all in this together.